In the quiet hours of evening, when the world settles into its natural rhythm, and your mind yearns for the kind of profound tranquility that only deep philosophical wisdom can provide, there exists a thinker whose insights can guide you into the most peaceful slumber imaginable. Arthur Schopenhauer, the brilliant German philosopher of the 19th century, developed a complete understanding of human existence that speaks directly to our deepest need for meaning, peace, and ultimate rest. Tonight, we embark on a journey through the entire philosophical universe that Schopenhauer created, a universe where every concept flows naturally into the next like gentle waves lapping at the shore of consciousness. This is not merely an academic exercise or a dry recitation of abstract ideas. Instead, we are entering a living system of thought that addresses the very core of what it means to be human, what it means to suffer, and most importantly, what it means to find genuine peace in a world that often seems chaotic and overwhelming. Schopenhauer understood something that few philosophers before or since have grasped with such clarity and depth. He recognized that beneath all our daily concerns, beneath all our striving and wanting and hoping, there lies a fundamental truth about the nature of existence itself. This truth, when properly understood and embraced, has the power to transform not only how we think about the world, but how we experience every moment of our lives, including these precious moments of rest and restoration. What makes Schopenhauer's philosophy particularly suited for this evening journey is its remarkable ability to address the restless mind directly. While other philosophical systems might agitate the intellect with complex logical puzzles or abstract metaphysical speculations, Schopenhauer's insights work like a gentle balm on consciousness itself. His ideas have a way of settling the mind into deeper and deeper levels of understanding, each level more peaceful and restorative than the last. As we explore his complete philosophical system together, you will discover how every aspect of his thinking contributes to a growing sense of clarity and calm. From his groundbreaking insights into the nature of perception and reality, to his profound understanding of human motivation and desire, to his ultimate vision of how consciousness can transcend its ordinary limitations and achieve genuine peace, every element of his philosophy works together, like instruments, in a perfectly orchestrated symphony of wisdom. The beauty of Schopenhauer's approach lies in its organic wholeness. Unlike philosophers who construct rigid, systematic edifices that must be memorized and defended, Schopenhauer developed his insights through deep personal reflection on the actual texture of human experience. He was not content with clever arguments or impressive logical constructions. Instead, he sought to understand the living reality of consciousness itself, the immediate felt sense of what it means to be aware, to want, to suffer, and ultimately to find release from suffering. This experiential foundation gives his philosophy a unique power to speak directly to the heart of human existence. When Schopenhauer describes the nature of desire, he is not offering abstract theoretical propositions, but pointing to something you can recognize immediately in your own experience. When he explains the relationship between suffering and attachment, he illuminates patterns that you have lived through countless times. And when he reveals the possibility of genuine peace and liberation, he is describing states of consciousness that become available to anyone who follows his insights with patience and understanding. The journey we are beginning tonight unfolds naturally through several interconnected stages, each building upon the insights of the previous stage while opening new depths of understanding. We begin with Schopenhauer's revolutionary analysis of how human consciousness actually works, how we construct our experience of reality through the fundamental structures of perception and thinking. This foundational understanding creates the groundwork for everything that follows. From there, we explore his penetrating insights into the nature of human desire and motivation, discovering how the endless cycle of wanting and temporary satisfaction creates the basic rhythm of ordinary human existence. This exploration reveals both the source of human suffering and the first glimpses of how that suffering might be transcended through deeper understanding. As our journey continues, we delve into Schopenhauer's profound analysis of the will, that fundamental life force that drives all existence and creates both the beauty and the tragedy of the world as we know it. Understanding the will in its various manifestations opens up entirely new perspectives on everything from artistic beauty to moral compassion, to the ultimate possibility of spiritual liberation. The culmination of our exploration leads us into Schopenhauer's vision of how consciousness can transcend its ordinary limitations and achieve genuine peace through what he called the denial of the will to live. This is not a morbid or pessimistic conclusion, but rather the discovery of a form of consciousness so expanded and liberated that it no longer suffers from the conflicts and contradictions that characterize ordinary mental life. Throughout this journey, you will notice how each concept flows naturally into the next, how each insight illuminates and deepens the insights that came before. Schopenhauer's philosophy possesses a remarkable internal coherence that makes it particularly suitable for the kind of deep, meditative reflection that naturally leads to peaceful rest. Unlike systems of thought that require constant mental effort to hold together, his insights support and reinforce each other in ways that create an increasingly stable and restful state of understanding. What makes tonight's exploration especially valuable is our approach to these profound ideas. Rather than treating them as intellectual puzzles to be solved or academic propositions to be memorized, we encounter them as living truths that can transform our immediate experience of consciousness itself. Each insight becomes not just something we think about, but something we can directly experience and embody in the present moment. This experiential approach aligns perfectly with Schopenhauer's own method of philosophical investigation. He was never satisfied with merely theoretical understanding, but always sought to connect his insights with the lived reality of human consciousness. His greatest discoveries emerged not from abstract reasoning, but from careful attention to the actual structure and content of immediate experience. As we begin our detailed exploration of his philosophical system, you will find that this same experiential quality naturally emerges. The concepts we examine are not foreign abstractions imposed from outside, but recognizable patterns and truths that illuminate the very consciousness through which you are receiving these ideas. This creates a unique form of philosophical understanding that is simultaneously intellectual and contemplative, analytical and restful. The first major insight that Schopenhauer offers us concerns the fundamental nature of human knowledge and perception. Most people assume that we perceive the world directly as it really is, that our senses provide us with accurate information about external objects and events. But Schopenhauer discovered something far more subtle and profound about how consciousness actually constructs its experience of reality. Through careful analysis of the process of perception itself, he revealed that what we call the external world is actually a construction created by consciousness according to certain fundamental principles or categories. We never encounter raw reality directly, but always experience a world that has been organized and structured by the basic forms of human understanding. This insight might initially seem abstract or merely theoretical, but it has immediate practical implications for how we understand our relationship to everything we experience. When we recognize that the world as we know it is partially constructed by consciousness itself, we begin to see that our experience is far more fluid and malleable than we typically assume. This recognition opens up possibilities for transforming our experience in ways that seemed impossible when we believed we were simply passive recipients of external information. The three fundamental principles that govern this construction of experience are space, time, and causality. Everything we perceive appears to us as located somewhere in space, occurring at some point in time, and connected to other events through causal relationships. These are not optional features of some experiences, but necessary conditions for any possible human experience whatsoever. Space provides the framework within which we distinguish between different objects and organize our physical interactions with the world around us. Without spatial awareness, we could not navigate our environment or even distinguish between ourselves and other things. Time creates the sequential flow through which we experience change, development, and the relationship between past, present, and future. Without temporal awareness, experience would collapse into an undifferentiated instant without memory, anticipation, or development. Causality connects different events into meaningful patterns, allowing us to understand why things happen and how different factors influence each other. Without causal understanding, experience would seem completely random and unpredictable, making it impossible to learn from the past or plan for the future. These three principles work together to create what Schopenhauer called the world of representation, the organized, meaningful world that consciousness constructs from the raw material of immediate experience. This world of representation is neither purely subjective fantasy nor simple objective reality, but rather the result of consciousness actively organizing and structuring its experience according to these fundamental principles. Understanding this process of construction reveals something crucial about the nature of human knowledge and the possibilities for genuine wisdom. When we recognize that the world as we know it is partially created by consciousness itself, we begin to understand both the power and the limitations of ordinary human knowledge. We see how consciousness creates meaningful experience while simultaneously recognizing that this created experience may not correspond exactly to the ultimate nature of reality itself. This recognition opens up the first glimpse of what Schopenhauer considered the deepest philosophical question. If the world as we know it is constructed by consciousness, according to these fundamental principles, what lies beyond or beneath this construction? What is the nature of reality as it exists, independent of the organizing activity of human consciousness? Consciousness. This question leads us naturally into the heart of Schopenhauer's revolutionary discovery, the insight that transformed not only his understanding of philosophy, but his entire experience of existence itself. Beyond the world of representation, beyond the realm of space, time, and causality that consciousness constructs, lies what he called the will. This is not will in the ordinary sense of conscious decision-making or deliberate choice, but something far more fundamental and all-encompassing. The will represents the underlying reality that manifests itself through all the phenomena we observe in the world of representation. It is the inner essence of everything that appears to consciousness, the driving force that creates and sustains all the objects and events we perceive. While the world of representation presents itself as a collection of separate objects interacting through causal relationships across space and time, the will reveals itself as the single unified reality that underlies and connects all these apparent multiplicities. This discovery emerged from Schopenhauer's careful reflection on his own immediate experience. When he examined his own body from the inside, so to speak, he noticed something remarkable. From the external perspective of representation, his body appeared as one object among others, subject to the same spatial, temporal, and causal relationships that govern all physical phenomena. But from the internal perspective of immediate experience, he recognized something entirely different. From within, the body reveals itself as will, as pure striving and wanting and desiring that manifests itself through physical movements, emotional responses, and the constant pressure of various needs and impulses. This inner experience of being a body is not mediated by the categories of space, time, and causality in the same way that external perceptions are. Instead, it presents itself as immediate, direct awareness of willing itself. Through this recognition, Schopenhauer realized that he had discovered the key to understanding the relationship between the world of representation and ultimate reality. The will that he experienced directly as the inner nature of his own being must also be the inner nature of everything else that appears in the world of representation. Every object, every force, every process in the natural world is actually a manifestation of this same fundamental will. This insight reveals the profound unity that underlies the apparent diversity of the phenomenal world. While consciousness constructs a world of separate objects interacting across space and time, deeper investigation shows that all these apparent separations are created by the organizing principles of representation itself. At the level of ultimate reality, there is only one will manifesting itself through countless different phenomena. Understanding this unity has immediate implications for how we experience our relationship to the world around us. The sense of isolation and separation that characterizes ordinary consciousness begins to dissolve when we recognize that the same fundamental reality that constitutes our deepest being also constitutes the deepest being of everything else. The boundaries between self and world, between subject and object, reveal themselves as constructions of the representing consciousness rather than ultimate features of reality itself. But recognizing the will as the underlying unity of all existence does not immediately solve the problem of human suffering. In fact, it reveals suffering to be an even more fundamental aspect of existence than might initially appear. The will manifests itself through constant striving, endless wanting, perpetual dissatisfaction with present conditions, and restless movement toward goals that promise but never deliver lasting fulfillment. This restless striving characterizes not only human consciousness, but all manifestations of will throughout nature. The plant grows toward the light, the animal seeks food and reproduction, the human being pursues countless objects of desire, all driven by the same fundamental will that can never achieve permanent satisfaction, because its very nature is to will, to want, to strive for something other than what currently exists. From this perspective, suffering emerges not as an accidental feature of human life that might be eliminated through better circumstances or wiser choices, but as the inevitable consequence of willing itself. As long as consciousness identifies with the will and its endless striving, some form of dissatisfaction remains unavoidable. Even when particular desires are fulfilled, the will immediately generates new desires, creating an endless cycle of temporary satisfaction followed by renewed wanting. This analysis might seem to lead to a pessimistic conclusion about the human condition, but Schopenhauer's investigation reveals something far more hopeful. The same recognition that shows us the universality of suffering also points toward the possibility of genuine liberation from suffering. When consciousness understands the nature of will clearly enough, it begins to see the possibility of a different kind of relationship to willing itself. The key insight is that consciousness is not identical with will, even though it ordinarily identifies completely with the will's striving and wanting. Consciousness possesses the capacity to step back from immediate identification with desire and observe the process of willing from a more detached perspective. This stepping back does not require suppressing or fighting against desire, but rather involves a subtle shift in the center of identity from the content of willing to the awareness that observes willing. When this shift occurs, even temporarily, consciousness experiences a profound sense of peace and liberation. The restless pressure of constantly wanting something other than what exists dissolves into a state of serene acceptance of present experience. This is not passive resignation or emotional numbness, but rather a vibrant, alert awareness that finds complete fulfillment in the simple fact of being conscious without needing consciousness to be consciousness of any particular object or goal. Schopenhauer discovered that this liberated state of consciousness manifests itself spontaneously in certain experiences that are already familiar to human life, though their deeper significance is rarely understood. The contemplation of beauty provides one of the most accessible examples of how consciousness can temporarily transcend its ordinary identification with willing. When we encounter genuine beauty, whether in nature, art, or human form, consciousness becomes so completely absorbed in the object of contemplation that it temporarily forgets all personal concerns, desires, and goals. In these moments, the usual subject-object relationship dissolves into pure aesthetic experience, where there is neither a separate self doing the contemplating nor a separate object being contemplated, but only the immediate presence of beauty itself. During aesthetic contemplation, the will becomes temporarily quiet because consciousness is so completely satisfied with present experience that it generates no desire for anything different or additional. This creates a natural state of peace and fulfillment that requires no effort to maintain and produces no anxiety about whether it will continue. The beauty reveals itself through consciousness, while consciousness reveals itself through beauty in a perfect unity that transcends the ordinary dualities of subject and object, self and world. These experiences of aesthetic contemplation provide glimpses of what Schopenhauer considered the ultimate possibility for human consciousness, the complete and permanent transcendence of identification with willing. While aesthetic experience offers only temporary liberation that naturally returns to ordinary consciousness, after a period of contemplation, the same essential movement can potentially become a stable transformation of consciousness itself. This transformation occurs through what Schopenhauer called the denial of the will to live. This phrase can be misleading if interpreted literally, because it does not refer to suicide or the rejection of life, but rather to a fundamental reorientation of consciousness that sees through the illusion of separate selfhood and recognizes the unity that underlies all apparent diversity. When consciousness achieves this recognition fully and permanently, it no longer identifies primarily with the personal will and its endless desires, but rather with the universal awareness that witnesses all willing without being caught in any particular manifestation of will. This witnessing awareness experiences profound peace because it no longer depends on external circumstances for its fulfillment and no longer suffers from the inevitable frustrations that accompany identification with desire. The path toward this transformation involves a gradual deepening of understanding combined with the cultivation of compassion for all beings who remain caught in the cycle of willing and suffering. As consciousness recognizes its own deepest nature more clearly, it naturally develops empathy for others who are struggling with the same fundamental challenges of existence. This compassion emerges not from moral obligation or emotional sympathy, but from direct recognition that the same will that creates suffering in one's own experience also creates suffering in the experience of all other beings. When the boundaries between self and other are seen to be constructions of the representing consciousness, rather than ultimate realities, helping others becomes as natural as caring for oneself, because the distinction between self and other loses its absolute character. Through this combination of deepening understanding and expanding compassion, consciousness gradually loosens its identification with personal willing and opens itself to the possibility of a more universal perspective. This process unfolds naturally over time as insights mature and integrate themselves into the fabric of daily experience, creating an increasingly stable foundation for genuine peace and liberation. The practical implications of this philosophical understanding extend into every aspect of human life, transforming how we approach relationships, work, creative expression, and the countless small decisions that shape our daily experience. When consciousness operates from the recognition of underlying unity rather than apparent separation, every interaction becomes an opportunity to express and deepen this understanding through concrete actions and responses. This transformation of daily life begins with how we understand and respond to the inevitable challenges that arise in human relationships. When consciousness recognizes that the apparent conflicts between different people actually reflect the same underlying will, expressing itself through different individual manifestations, our approach to interpersonal difficulties shifts from defensive reaction to compassionate understanding. Instead of experiencing others as threats to our personal desires or obstacles to our individual fulfillment, we begin to see them as fellow expressions of the same fundamental reality that constitutes our own deepest being. This recognition does not eliminate the practical necessity of making decisions or setting appropriate boundaries, but it transforms the emotional quality of these interactions from anxiety and hostility to patience and wisdom. The same principle applies to our relationship with work and creative endeavors. When consciousness understands that genuine satisfaction comes not from achieving particular external goals, but from the quality of awareness we bring to present activity, work becomes a vehicle for expressing and deepening wisdom, rather than merely a means of satisfying personal ambitions or social expectations. This shift in perspective reveals that every task, no matter how mundane or apparently insignificant, offers opportunities for practicing the kind of present moment awareness that characterizes liberated consciousness. Whether we are engaged in intellectual pursuits, physical labor, artistic creation, or simple daily maintenance activities, the essential question becomes not what we are accomplishing, but how fully and peacefully we can engage with whatever presents itself in immediate experience. Schopenhauer's analysis of artistic creation provides particularly profound insights into how consciousness can express its deepest understanding through creative work. When an artist creates from genuine inspiration rather than personal ambition or external pressure, the creative process becomes a form of meditation in which individual will temporarily dissolves into universal expression. The greatest works of art emerge when consciousness becomes so completely absorbed in the creative process that there is no sense of a separate self doing the creating. Instead, the artistic vision expresses itself through the artist's skills and sensibilities, while the artist serves as a transparent medium for beauty to manifest in concrete form. This creative transparency produces works that speak directly to the universal human experience, rather than merely expressing personal opinions or individual emotions. The same principle that governs authentic artistic creation also illuminates the nature of genuine wisdom and compassionate action in all areas of life. When consciousness operates from its deepest understanding, rather than from personal preference or social conditioning, its responses to life situations naturally align with what serves the highest good of all involved. This alignment occurs not through moral effort or deliberate attempt to be good, but through the natural expression of consciousness that has recognized its fundamental unity with all existence. Just as water flows downhill without effort or decision, wisdom and compassion flow naturally from consciousness that has transcended the illusion of separate selfhood. Understanding this natural flow of wisdom reveals why Schopenhauer considered ethics to be ultimately grounded in metaphysical insight rather than moral rules or social conventions. When consciousness recognizes that harming others is literally harming itself, because there is ultimately no real separation between self and other, ethical behavior becomes as spontaneous and effortless as avoiding physical pain. This metaphysical foundation for ethics provides a much more stable basis for moral action than systems based on duty, consequence, or social agreement. These conventional approaches to ethics require constant mental effort to maintain and often break down under pressure because they depend on external motivations rather than direct recognition of truth. The ethics that emerges from metaphysical understanding requires no external enforcement because it expresses the natural movement of consciousness that has seen through the illusions that create the possibility of genuinely harmful action. When consciousness knows itself to be ultimately one with everything it might harm, harmful action becomes literally impossible because it would require consciousness to act against its own deepest nature. This understanding transforms not only how we treat other people, but also how we relate to the natural world and all forms of life. The recognition that the same will that expresses itself through human consciousness also expresses itself through animal consciousness, plant life, and even inanimate natural processes creates a profound sense of kinship with all existence. This kinship manifests not as sentimental attachment or romantic idealization of nature, but as clear recognition that we participate in a living universe where every phenomenon represents a unique expression of the same fundamental reality. This participation consciousness naturally generates appropriate care and respect for the environment, while eliminating the sense of alienation and separation that characterizes ordinary human relationship to the natural world. The practical implications of this expanded awareness extend even to how we understand and respond to physical illness, aging, and the approach of death. When consciousness recognizes that its essential nature transcends the particular physical form through which it currently expresses itself, these inevitable changes lose much of their capacity to generate anxiety and suffering. This does not mean becoming indifferent to physical health or ignoring reasonable medical care, but rather maintaining perspective on the relationship between consciousness and its temporary physical vehicle. The body requires appropriate attention and care, just as we maintain any valuable instrument. But our sense of identity and security does not depend entirely on the body's condition or duration. As physical energy naturally decreases with age and various limitations develop, consciousness that understands its own deeper nature can adapt gracefully to changing circumstances without experiencing these changes as fundamental threats to its well-being. The peace that comes from recognizing our essential nature as awareness itself provides a stable foundation that remains undisturbed by the inevitable fluctuations of physical existence. This same understanding illuminates the meaning of death itself, revealing it to be not the termination of consciousness, but rather the dissolution of the particular form through which consciousness has been expressing itself. Just as the wave returns to the ocean without the ocean being diminished, individual consciousness returns to universal consciousness without any ultimate loss or tragedy. Schopenhauer's investigation of these deepest questions about life and death emerged from his careful study of various wisdom traditions, particularly the philosophical and contemplative insights developed in ancient India. He found in texts like the Upanishads and the teachings of Buddhism profound confirmation of the insights he had discovered through his own philosophical reflection. This cross-cultural validation strengthened his confidence that his discoveries reflected universal truths about consciousness rather than merely personal or culturally conditioned perspectives. The fact that contemplatives, separated by thousands of years and vast geographical distances, had arrived at essentially similar insights, suggested that these discoveries reveal the actual structure of consciousness itself, rather than arbitrary philosophical constructions. The convergence of these different wisdom traditions around certain fundamental insights provides powerful evidence that human consciousness possesses the capacity to transcend its ordinary limitations and achieve direct knowledge of its own deepest nature. This capacity appears to be a universal feature of human consciousness, rather than a special ability possessed by only a few exceptional individuals. What distinguishes those who actualize this potential from those who remain caught in ordinary patterns of suffering and confusion is not special talent or favorable circumstances, but rather the willingness to pursue self-understanding with sufficient depth and persistence. The insights themselves are available to anyone who approaches the investigation of consciousness with genuine sincerity and patience. This accessibility of wisdom provides hope for anyone who feels trapped in cycles of dissatisfaction and restless seeking. The peace and liberation that Schopenhauer described are not distant goals that require years of special training or extraordinary circumstances to achieve. Instead, they represent the natural state of consciousness, when it is no longer obscured by identification with temporary desires and fears. The process of uncovering this natural state involves gradually releasing the mental habits and emotional patterns that create the sense of separation and conflict. This release occurs not through forceful suppression or dramatic breakthrough experiences, but through patient, gentle inquiry into the actual nature of present moment awareness. As this inquiry deepens, consciousness begins to recognize its own peace and completeness independent of any particular content or experience. This recognition grows stronger and more stable over time, eventually becoming the predominant quality of awareness, rather than just an occasional glimpse or temporary state. The establishment of this stable peace marks the fulfillment of what Schopenhauer considered the highest human possibility. When consciousness rests permanently in the recognition of its own essential nature, it experiences the profound satisfaction that comes from finally arriving home after a long journey through foreign territories. This homecoming brings with it a natural gratitude for the entire journey, including all the apparent mistakes, wrong turns, and periods of confusion that seemed so problematic at the time. From the perspective of final understanding, every experience reveals itself to have been a necessary part of the process through which consciousness discovers its own deepest truth. Even the suffering that previously seemed so meaningless and unfortunate shows itself to have served the essential function of motivating consciousness to seek something deeper and more lasting than temporary satisfactions. Without the pressure created by dissatisfaction with partial solutions, consciousness might never develop the intensity of inquiry necessary to penetrate to ultimate understanding. This recognition transforms the entire meaning of human life from a series of random events, punctuated by occasional pleasures, to a coherent process of awakening that unfolds with perfect intelligence even when its deeper purpose remains hidden from ordinary perspective. Every moment reveals itself as precisely what is needed for consciousness to take the next step in its journey toward complete self-recognition. This profound understanding of life as a process of awakening naturally leads us to examine how consciousness experiences the world through what Schopenhauer identified as the fundamental categories that shape all human perception. When we look closely at how awareness actually functions, we discover that everything we call reality emerges through three basic principles that operate so naturally and seamlessly that we rarely notice their presence. The first of these principles is what creates our sense of space, that fundamental dimension through which we organize all our physical experiences. Without spatial awareness, we could not distinguish between near and far, inside and outside, here and there. Every object we perceive appears to occupy a particular location in relation to other objects, creating the rich three-dimensional world through which our bodies move and in which all our practical activities unfold. But space, as Schopenhauer discovered, is not simply an empty container waiting to be filled with objects. Rather, it is an active organizing principle of consciousness itself, a way that awareness structures its experience to create meaningful relationships between different aspects of what it perceives. The chair appears separate from the table. The tree stands apart from the house. Your body occupies a different location from the book you are reading, all because consciousness organizes its perceptions according to spatial relationships. This spatial organization happens so automatically and effortlessly that we typically assume space exists independently of consciousness, as an objective feature of the external world. But careful reflection reveals that space as we experience it is always space for consciousness, space as it appears to awareness, space structured according to the fundamental patterns through which human perception operates. The second organizing principle creates our experience of time, that flowing dimension through which we distinguish between past, present, and future. Every event we perceive appears to occur at a particular moment in relation to other moments, creating the sequential flow through which memory, anticipation, and immediate experience organize themselves into coherent patterns. Time allows us to experience change, development, and the meaningful connection between causes and their effects. Without temporal awareness, everything would collapse into an eternal now without history, without the possibility of learning from experience, without the capacity to plan or hope or remember. The story of our lives unfolds through time, each moment building upon previous moments and creating the foundation for future moments. Yet time, like space, reveals itself upon careful examination to be a structure of consciousness, rather than an independent feature of objective reality. The past exists for us only through present memory, the future only through present anticipation, and even the present moment appears to consciousness as an ever-changing flow of experiences that never quite stand still long enough to be grasped definitively. The third fundamental principle governs how we understand the relationships between different events through what we call causality. When we observe that fire burns wood, that rain makes the ground wet, that pushing a door makes it open, we are recognizing causal connections that allow us to understand why things happen and how different factors influence each other. Causal understanding makes possible all forms of practical knowledge and scientific investigation. We can learn from experience, predict future events, and intervene effectively in the world around us, because consciousness organizes its perceptions according to patterns of cause and effect. Without this causal organization, experience would appear completely random and unpredictable, making it impossible to develop any reliable knowledge about how the world operates. But causality, like space and time, operates as a principle through which consciousness structures its experience rather than as an objective feature of reality itself. We never actually observe causality directly, but only sequences of events that consciousness interprets according to causal patterns. The burning of wood by fire appears to us as a causal relationship because consciousness organizes these perceptions according to its fundamental tendency to connect events through cause and effect relationships. These three principles of space, time, and causality work together to create what Schopenhauer called the phenomenal world, the organized, meaningful reality that appears to consciousness through the activity of perception and understanding. This phenomenal world is neither pure illusion nor simple objective fact, but rather the result of consciousness actively organizing the raw material of immediate experience according to these fundamental structural principles. Understanding how consciousness creates the phenomenal world through these organizing principles reveals something crucial about the nature of human knowledge and the possibilities for wisdom. All our ordinary knowledge, whether practical, scientific, or philosophical, operates within the framework created by space, time, and causality. We can discover remarkable truths about how things work within this framework, but the framework itself remains the boundary condition for all possible knowledge of this type. This recognition opens up the profound question that drives all of Schopenhauer's deeper investigations. If everything we ordinarily know about reality is organized by consciousness, according to these three principles, what lies beyond or beneath this organization? What is the nature of reality as it exists prior to being structured by spatial, temporal, and causal relationships? This question cannot be answered through more sophisticated analysis of phenomena, because all phenomenal analysis operates within the very framework we are now questioning. Instead, it requires a different kind of investigation, one that examines consciousness itself, rather than the objects that appear to consciousness. When Schopenhauer turned his attention inward to examine the nature of consciousness directly, he made the discovery that revolutionized his entire understanding of existence. He found that consciousness has access to itself not only as the subject that perceives objects organized in space, time, and causality, but also as something that transcends this subject-object relationship entirely. This transcendent dimension of consciousness reveals itself most clearly in what he called the experience of will. But this is will in a much deeper sense than ordinary decision-making or deliberate choice. It is the fundamental life force that manifests itself through all the phenomena we observe in the external world and all the experiences we recognize within our own awareness. The will in this profound sense is not something we have, but something we are. It is the innermost reality of consciousness itself, the driving force that creates both the subject that perceives and all the objects that appear to perception. When consciousness recognizes its own nature as will, it discovers that the apparent separation between itself and the world it perceives is actually a construction created by the organizing activity of representation. This recognition emerges through careful attention to immediate experience rather than through abstract reasoning or theoretical speculation. When you examine your own consciousness in this moment, you can notice that awareness itself has a quality of aliveness, of dynamic presence, of spontaneous responsiveness that cannot be reduced to any particular thought, feeling, or perception. This aliveness is will in its most fundamental form. It is the source from which all particular desires, emotions, and impulses emerge. But it is not identical with any of these specific manifestations. It is the pure energy of consciousness itself, the basic fact of being aware, rather than any particular content of awareness. When this recognition deepens, consciousness begins to understand that the same fundamental will that constitutes its own innermost nature also constitutes the innermost nature of everything that appears in the phenomenal world. The tree growing toward sunlight, the river flowing toward the sea, the animal seeking food, the human being pursuing happiness, all represent different manifestations of the same underlying will that you can recognize directly as your own deepest reality. This understanding dissolves the sense of separation and isolation that characterizes ordinary consciousness. Instead of experiencing yourself as a separate individual surrounded by an alien world of foreign objects and other people, you begin to recognize the fundamental unity that connects all apparent diversity. The boundaries between self and world, between subject and object, reveal themselves as constructions of the representing consciousness, rather than ultimate features of reality. But this recognition of unity through will initially brings with it a deeper understanding of why suffering is such a universal feature of existence. The will manifests itself through constant striving, endless wanting, perpetual movement toward goals that promise satisfaction but never deliver lasting fulfillment. Every achievement of the will immediately generates new desires, creating an endless cycle of temporary satisfaction followed by renewed dissatisfaction. This restless striving characterizes not only human consciousness, but every manifestation of will throughout nature. The plant reaches toward light, but can never have enough light. The animal seeks food, but must constantly seek more food. The human being pursues pleasure, knowledge, love, achievement, but finds that each attainment brings only temporary satisfaction before the will generates new wants and needs. From this perspective, suffering emerges not as an accidental feature of life that might be eliminated through better circumstances, but as the inevitable result of will itself. As long as consciousness identifies completely with the will and its endless striving, some form of dissatisfaction remains unavoidable, because the very nature of will is to want something other than what currently exists. This analysis might seem to lead toward pessimism about the human condition, but Schopenhauer's investigation reveals something far more hopeful. The same insight that shows us the universality of suffering also points toward the possibility of genuine liberation from suffering. The key lies in recognizing that consciousness is not identical with will, even though it ordinarily identifies completely with the will's striving. Consciousness possesses the remarkable capacity to step back from immediate identification with desire and observe the process of willing from a more detached perspective. This stepping back does not require fighting against desire or suppressing natural impulses, but rather involves a subtle shift in the center of identity from the content of willing to the awareness that witnesses willing. When this shift occurs, consciousness experiences a profound transformation in its relationship to desire and satisfaction. The restless pressure of constantly wanting something different dissolves into a state of peaceful acceptance of whatever presents itself in immediate experience. This acceptance is not passive resignation, but vibrant, alert awareness that finds complete fulfillment in the simple fact of being conscious. This liberated state of consciousness manifests itself most clearly in experiences of genuine beauty, whether encountered in nature, art, music, or human relationships. When consciousness becomes completely absorbed in contemplating something truly beautiful, it temporarily forgets all personal concerns and desires. In these moments, the usual subject-object duality dissolves into pure aesthetic experience, where there is no separate self doing the contemplating and no separate object being contemplated, but only beauty revealing itself through consciousness. During aesthetic contemplation, the will becomes naturally quiet because consciousness finds such complete satisfaction in present experience that it generates no desire for anything additional or different. This creates a spontaneous state of peace and fulfillment that requires no effort to maintain and produces no anxiety about whether it will continue. These experiences of aesthetic absorption provide glimpses of what Schopenhauer recognized as the ultimate possibility for human consciousness: the permanent transcendence of identification with personal willing through recognition of consciousness's essential nature as pure awareness. While aesthetic experience offers only temporary liberation that naturally returns to ordinary patterns, the same fundamental movement can potentially become a stable transformation of identity itself. This transformation occurs through what Schopenhauer called the denial of the will to live, a phrase that can be misleading if interpreted superficially. This does not refer to suicide or rejection of life, but rather to a fundamental reorientation of consciousness that recognizes its essential nature as awareness itself, rather than as the personal will with its endless desires and concerns. When consciousness achieves this recognition fully, it no longer identifies primarily with individual wanting, but rather with the universal awareness that witnesses all willing without being caught in any particular manifestation of desire. This witnessing awareness experiences profound peace because it no longer depends on external circumstances for fulfillment and no longer suffers from the inevitable frustrations that accompany identification with wanting. The cultivation of this transformation involves both deepening understanding and developing genuine compassion for all beings who remain caught in cycles of desire and frustration. As consciousness recognizes its own deepest nature more clearly, it naturally develops empathy for others who are struggling with the same fundamental challenges of existence. This compassion emerges not from moral obligation or emotional sympathy, but from direct recognition that the same will that creates suffering in one's own experience also creates suffering in all other conscious beings. When the boundaries between self and other are understood to be constructions of representational consciousness rather than ultimate realities, caring for others becomes as natural as caring for oneself. Through this combination of deepening wisdom and expanding compassion, consciousness gradually releases its identification with personal desires and opens to the possibility of resting in its own essential nature as pure awareness. This process unfolds naturally as understanding matures and integrates itself into daily experience, creating an increasingly stable foundation for genuine peace. The practical implications of this philosophical understanding transform every aspect of human life, from intimate relationships to creative work to the simplest daily activities. When consciousness operates from recognition of its essential unity with all existence, every interaction becomes an opportunity to express and deepen this understanding through concrete actions and responses. In relationships, this recognition shifts our approach from defensive self-protection to genuine openness and care. Instead of experiencing others as potential threats to our personal desires, we begin to see them as fellow expressions of the same consciousness that constitutes our own deepest being. This does not eliminate the need for appropriate boundaries or practical decisions, but it transforms the emotional quality of all interpersonal interactions from anxiety and competition to patience and understanding. The same transformation applies to creative endeavors and work of all kinds. When consciousness understands that genuine satisfaction comes from the quality of awareness we bring to present activity rather than from achieving particular external results, every task becomes a vehicle for expressing wisdom rather than merely pursuing personal ambitions. This shift reveals that mundane activities like cooking, cleaning, walking, or a simple conversation offer the same opportunities for practicing present moment awareness that characterize the most elevated spiritual practices. The essential question becomes not what we accomplish, but how fully we can engage with whatever life presents in each moment. Each moment. This understanding reveals the extraordinary ordinariness of genuine wisdom, how the most profound insights naturally integrate themselves into the texture of everyday experience without creating any sense of separation between spiritual understanding and practical engagement with the world. When consciousness recognizes its essential nature, washing dishes becomes as sacred as formal meditation. Listening to a friend becomes as transformative as studying philosophical texts. And walking through a garden becomes as revelatory as contemplating the deepest metaphysical questions. The integration of wisdom into daily life occurs not through adding something new to ordinary activities, but through recognizing the depth that was always present beneath the surface of routine experiences. Every moment contains within itself the same infinite awareness that mystics and philosophers have sought through years of dedicated practice. The only difference lies in whether consciousness recognizes this ever-present depth or remains focused exclusively on the changing content of experience. This recognition transforms our understanding of what constitutes genuine spiritual practice. Rather than requiring special techniques, exotic experiences, or withdrawal from ordinary responsibilities, the deepest spiritual development emerges through bringing complete attention to whatever naturally presents itself in the flow of daily life. The mother caring for her children, the craftsman perfecting his skills, the friend offering comfort during difficulty, all participate equally in the same fundamental awakening that characterizes the most advanced contemplative achievements. Schopenhauer understood that this accessibility of wisdom reflects the true democracy of consciousness itself. The capacity for liberation from suffering does not depend on intellectual brilliance, favorable circumstances, or special training, but rather on the willingness to investigate the nature of awareness with sufficient honesty and persistence. Every human being possesses the same essential consciousness, whose recognition constitutes the highest philosophical achievement. This universal availability of wisdom explains why similar insights appear independently across different cultures and historical periods. When consciousness examines itself deeply enough, it inevitably discovers the same fundamental truths about its own nature, regardless of the particular cultural context or conceptual framework through which the investigation proceeds. The language and imagery may vary dramatically, but the essential recognition remains constant because it reflects the actual structure of awareness itself. The convergence of these different wisdom traditions around certain core insights provides powerful confirmation that genuine philosophical understanding transcends mere cultural conditioning or personal opinion. When contemplatives, separated by centuries and continents, arrive at essentially identical conclusions about the nature of consciousness and the possibility of liberation from suffering, we can be confident that these discoveries reveal universal truths rather than arbitrary philosophical constructions. This cross-cultural validation strengthens confidence in the reliability of direct investigation of consciousness as a method for discovering truth. Unlike purely theoretical speculation that can lead to endless disagreement between different schools of thought, careful attention to the immediate structure of awareness tends to produce convergent results because all investigators are examining the same fundamental reality. The practical implications of this methodological insight extend far beyond academic philosophy into the realm of personal transformation and the cultivation of genuine wisdom. When we understand that the deepest truths about existence can be discovered through direct examination of present moment awareness, we gain access to a form of knowledge that does not depend on external authorities, cultural traditions, or accumulated learning. This does not diminish the value of studying the insights of great philosophers and contemplatives, but it places such study in proper perspective. The teachings of masters like Schopenhauer serve not as final authorities to be accepted without question, but as guides that point consciousness toward its own capacity for direct discovery. The ultimate validation of any philosophical insight must come through personal recognition rather than intellectual acceptance. This emphasis on direct investigation explains why Schopenhauer's philosophy has such a unique capacity to speak across cultural and temporal boundaries. His insights emerged not from abstract reasoning or cultural speculation, but from careful attention to the immediate structure of human consciousness. Because this structure remains constant across different historical periods and cultural contexts, his discoveries retain their relevance and transformative power regardless of changing social conditions. The timeless quality of genuine philosophical insight reflects the timeless nature of consciousness itself. While the content of awareness constantly changes as different thoughts, emotions, and perceptions arise and dissolve, the fundamental structure of awareness remains stable and recognizable. This stability provides the foundation for reliable knowledge about the essential nature of human existence and the possibilities for genuine fulfillment. Understanding this stability of consciousness creates confidence in the possibility of lasting transformation. The peace and liberation that emerge from recognizing the true nature of awareness are not temporary states that come and go unpredictably, but rather expressions of consciousness's essential nature that become increasingly stable as understanding deepens. Once consciousness recognizes itself clearly, this recognition tends to strengthen and expand rather than diminish over time. This progressive stabilization of wisdom explains why the path of philosophical development tends to accelerate as it advances. Initial insights create the foundation for deeper insights, which in turn support even more profound recognitions. Each stage of understanding makes possible discoveries that would have been impossible without the previous stages, creating a natural momentum toward complete self-recognition. The acceleration of philosophical development reflects the self-reinforcing nature of truth itself. Unlike false beliefs that require constant effort to maintain and defend against contradictory evidence, genuine insights thus support and strengthen each other in ways that create increasing clarity and stability. Truth has a natural tendency to reveal more of itself to consciousness that has already recognized some aspects of truth. This self-revealing quality of truth explains why the pursuit of wisdom becomes increasingly effortless as understanding matures. In the early stages of philosophical investigation, considerable effort may be required to overcome habitual patterns of thinking and to maintain attention on subtle aspects of experience. But as genuine insights emerge and stabilize, they begin to support themselves and naturally attract consciousness toward even deeper recognitions. The effortless quality that characterizes mature wisdom does not indicate lack of engagement or passive acceptance of superficial understanding. Rather, it reflects the natural flow of consciousness when it is no longer working against its own deepest nature. Just as water flows downhill without effort once obstacles are removed, understanding deepens naturally when the barriers created by false assumptions and conceptual confusion are dissolved. This dissolution of barriers occurs through patient investigation rather than forceful effort. The obstacles to clear seeing consist primarily of unexamined assumptions about the nature of consciousness and reality that create unnecessary confusion and conflict. When these assumptions are brought into the light of careful attention, they typically dissolve spontaneously because they cannot withstand direct examination. The process of dissolving conceptual barriers resembles the way morning mist disappears when touched by sunlight. The mist does not need to be fought or pushed away, but simply exposed to conditions that reveal its insubstantial nature. Similarly, the mental habits that obscure clear recognition of consciousness's essential nature dissolve naturally when exposed to the light of sustained attention. This gentle approach to transformation aligns with Schopenhauer's understanding of how genuine change occurs in consciousness. Forced attempts to alter fundamental patterns of perception typically create more resistance and confusion rather than lasting transformation. But patient investigation that simply observes these patterns with clear attention tends to produce spontaneous shifts toward greater clarity and peace. The spontaneous quality of genuine transformation indicates that liberation from suffering is not an achievement that consciousness must earn through effort, but rather a recognition of what is already present, but temporarily obscured. The peace and fulfillment that emerge through philosophical understanding do not come from outside consciousness, but represent the natural state of awareness when it is no longer distorted by false identifications and conceptual confusion. This recognition of consciousness's natural state as inherently peaceful and complete provides the foundation for understanding why Schopenhauer considered the denial of will to live to be the ultimate human possibility. When consciousness recognizes its essential nature as pure awareness rather than as individual desire, it discovers a form of satisfaction that requires no external objects or achievements to maintain itself. This intrinsic satisfaction does not eliminate the capacity for enjoying worldly pleasures or engaging effectively with practical responsibilities. Rather, it provides a stable foundation of contentment that remains undisturbed regardless of whether particular desires are fulfilled or frustrated. From this foundation, consciousness can engage fully with life's opportunities and challenges without depending on specific outcomes for its basic sense of well-being. The freedom that emerges from this recognition transforms the entire meaning of human choice and action. Instead of being driven by the compulsive pressure of unsatisfied desire, consciousness can respond to situations from wisdom and compassion rather than from need and fear. This creates the possibility for genuinely spontaneous actions that serves the highest good of all involved rather than merely pursuing narrow self-interest. This transformation of motivation naturally leads to what Schopenhauer recognized as the highest expression of human possibility, the spontaneous arising of universal compassion that sees no fundamental difference between self and other. When consciousness recognizes that the same awareness that constitutes its own essential nature also constitutes the essential nature of all conscious beings, caring for others becomes as natural and immediate as caring for oneself. This universal compassion manifests not as emotional sentimentality or moral obligation, but as clear recognition of the actual unity that underlies apparent diversity. Just as the right hand naturally cares for the left hand when it is injured, without any sense of sacrifice or moral virtue, consciousness that has recognized its universal nature naturally responds to the suffering of others with appropriate care and assistance. The actions that emerge from this recognition often appear quite ordinary from external observation, but they carry a quality of presence and effectiveness that distinguishes them from actions motivated by personal desire or social expectation. Because they emerge from clear seeing rather than conceptual thinking, they tend to address situations at their root, rather than merely treating surface symptoms. This effectiveness of wisdom-based action reflects consciousness's natural capacity to perceive what each situation actually requires, rather than imposing preconceived solutions based on past experience or theoretical understanding. When awareness is no longer clouded by personal agenda or emotional reactivity, it can respond to the unique requirements of each moment with remarkable precision and appropriateness. The cultivation of this responsive wisdom occurs through the same patient investigation that leads to all genuine philosophical understanding. By observing carefully how consciousness actually operates in various situations, we begin to recognize the difference between responses that emerge from clarity and those that arise from confusion or compulsion. This discrimination between clear and confused responses develops gradually as understanding deepens and stabilizes. Initially, the difference may be quite subtle and difficult to recognize consistently. But as consciousness becomes more familiar with its own essential nature, the quality of clarity becomes increasingly obvious and reliable as a guide for appropriate action. The reliability of this inner guidance explains why Schopenhauer placed such emphasis on direct investigation of consciousness rather than dependence on external authorities or conventional wisdom. When awareness recognizes its own essential nature clearly, it gains access to a source of understanding that transcends the limitations of personal knowledge or cultural conditioning. This transcendence of limitation does not create grandiose claims about possessing absolute knowledge or special powers, but rather generates profound humility about the mystery and complexity of existence. The more clearly consciousness recognizes its own nature, the more apparent it becomes that this nature is ultimately beyond all conceptual categories and descriptions. This recognition of ultimate mystery does not undermine confidence in practical wisdom or the possibility of effective action, but rather provides the foundation for genuine understanding that remains open to new insights and deeper recognitions. Consciousness that knows itself as fundamentally mysterious can respond to new situations with freshness and creativity, rather than relying entirely on past patterns and assumptions. The combination of practical effectiveness and ultimate humility that characterizes mature wisdom creates the perfect conditions for consciousness to continue developing throughout the entire course of human life. There is no point at which philosophical understanding becomes complete or final, but rather an endless deepening of recognition that reveals new dimensions of truth and beauty at every stage. This endless quality of genuine development ensures that the pursuit of wisdom never becomes boring or repetitive, but continues to offer fresh discoveries and deeper satisfactions regardless of how much understanding has already been achieved. Each insight opens doorways to even more profound recognitions, creating a natural momentum toward ever greater clarity and peace. The inexhaustible nature of consciousness' capacity for self-discovery provides hope and encouragement for anyone who feels overwhelmed by the apparent complexity of existence or discouraged by the slow pace of personal transformation. The journey toward genuine wisdom may require patience and persistence, but it offers rewards that grow richer and more satisfying with each step of the way. As consciousness settles more deeply into recognition of its own essential nature, the quality of rest and peace that emerges becomes a constant companion rather than an occasional visitor. This stable peace provides the perfect foundation for the kind of profound relaxation that allows both body and mind to release accumulated tensions and return to their natural state of ease and well-being. In this deepest recognition of consciousness resting in its own essential nature, we discover that sleep itself becomes transformed from mere biological necessity into a profound expression of wisdom. When awareness recognizes that its fundamental identity transcends the particular thoughts, emotions, and sensations that arise and dissolve throughout waking experience. The transition into sleep loses its quality of unconscious oblivion and reveals itself as a natural return to the source from which all experience emerges. The ordinary mind approaches sleep as an escape from the pressures and complications of daily life, a temporary refuge where consciousness disappears until morning brings back the familiar patterns of desire and concern. But when understanding has matured through philosophical investigation, sleep becomes something far more precious and meaningful. It represents the nightly opportunity for consciousness to release its identification with personal willing and rest in its own essential nature as pure awareness. This transformation of sleep occurs not through any special technique or deliberate practice, but as the natural consequence of deepening recognition during waking hours. When consciousness becomes increasingly familiar with its own essential nature through philosophical contemplation and direct investigation, this familiarity continues to influence experience even as the mind settles into rest. The dreams that arise from this foundation of understanding often possess a quality of clarity and wisdom that reflects consciousness's growing recognition of its own deeper nature. Instead of the confused jumble of unresolved desires and anxieties that typically characterizes ordinary dreaming, consciousness begins to dream from a place of greater integration and peace. These dreams may contain profound insights, beautiful imagery, or simply a quality of restful presence that continues the work of transformation even during sleep. But perhaps more significant than any particular dream content is the way that consciousness approaches the transition into sleep itself. When awareness recognizes that its essential nature remains constant regardless of whether it is dreaming, sleeping, or waking, the movement toward rest becomes a conscious letting go, rather than an unconscious collapse into oblivion. This conscious approach to sleep reveals one of the most practical applications of Schopenhauer's philosophical insights. The same recognition that transforms our relationship to desire and suffering during waking hours naturally extends its influence into the realm of rest and restoration. Sleep becomes a form of meditation, a nightly return to the source of all experience where consciousness can release the accumulated tensions and identifications of daily life. The quality of rest that emerges from this understanding differs markedly from ordinary sleep in its depth and restorative power. When consciousness approaches sleep from recognition of its essential nature, rather than from exhaustion or escape, the body and mind can release their tensions more completely and return more refreshed to waking activity. This is not mere physical restoration, but a renewal that touches every dimension of human experience. This renewal occurs because sleep approached with wisdom allows consciousness to release not only physical fatigue, but also the subtle psychological tensions that accumulate through identification with personal desires and concerns. During the day, consciousness may become caught in various forms of mental and emotional contraction as it navigates the challenges of relationship, work, and social responsibility. Sleep provides the natural opportunity for these contractions to dissolve back into the spacious awareness from which they arose. The process of this dissolution resembles the way that waves naturally subside back into the calm ocean from which they emerged. The waves do not need to be forced back into the water, but simply allowed to complete their natural cycle of arising and dissolving. Similarly, the thoughts, emotions, and sensations that characterize waking experience can be allowed to settle naturally back into the peaceful awareness that is their source. This settling occurs most easily when consciousness maintains a quality of gentle attention as it approaches sleep, neither grasping after particular experiences nor pushing away whatever naturally arises. This balanced attention allows the mind to release its contents without creating resistance or forcing premature relaxation. The approach to sleep becomes a practice of surrender, a willing release of control that trusts in consciousness's natural capacity for restoration. The trust that develops through this practice extends far beyond the bedroom into every aspect of daily life. When consciousness discovers through direct experience that it can safely release control and allow natural processes to unfold, this recognition creates confidence in life's fundamental trustworthiness. The anxious vigilance that characterizes so much of ordinary mental activity begins to relax as awareness recognizes that its essential well-being does not depend on constant monitoring and management. This relaxation of vigilance does not create carelessness or inattention to practical responsibilities, but rather allows consciousness to respond to situations from a place of natural wisdom rather than anxious reactivity. When awareness trusts in its own essential nature and life's underlying intelligence, it can engage with challenges and opportunities from a foundation of peace rather than fear. The peace that serves as this foundation reveals itself to be remarkably stable and reliable. Unlike emotional states that come and go unpredictably or mental conditions that depend on favorable circumstances, the peace that emerges from recognizing consciousness's essential nature provides a constant background of well-being that remains undisturbed by changing conditions. This stability creates the perfect environment for profound rest because consciousness no longer needs to maintain defensive vigilance against potential threats to its well-being. When awareness recognizes that its fundamental nature cannot be damaged by any external circumstance or internal experience, it can relax completely without fear of losing anything essential. The completeness of this relaxation allows both body and mind to release tensions that may have been held for years or even decades. Chronic muscular contractions that developed as responses to long-forgotten stresses begin to dissolve. Mental patterns that served as protection against imaginary dangers naturally fade away. Emotional armor that seemed necessary for psychological survival proves to be unnecessary baggage that can be safely released. This releasing occurs gradually and gently, without the dramatic upheavals that sometimes accompany forced attempts at psychological change. Because it emerges from growing recognition of truth rather than from efforts to fix problems, the transformation feels natural and sustainable rather than artificial or temporary. The naturalness of this transformation reflects consciousness's inherent tendency toward health and wholeness. When obstacles are removed rather than new qualities imposed. Just as a plant naturally grows toward light, when barriers are eliminated, awareness naturally moves toward greater clarity and peace when false identifications and unnecessary tensions are dissolved. This organic quality of genuine transformation explains why Schopenhauer's philosophical insights continue to offer fresh discoveries even after years of contemplation. Unlike intellectual systems that can be mastered through study and memorization, the recognition of consciousness's essential nature continues to deepen and reveal new dimensions of understanding throughout an entire lifetime. Each night's rest becomes an opportunity for this deepening to continue as consciousness releases the particular concerns and identifications of the day and returns to its source for renewal and restoration. The cyclical rhythm of engagement and rest, activity and release, mirrors the fundamental rhythm through which consciousness expresses and then transcends its various manifestations. Understanding this rhythm creates appreciation for both the active and receptive phases of experience. The periods of engaged activity during waking hours provide opportunities for consciousness to express its understanding through practical wisdom and compassionate action. The periods of rest and receptivity during sleep allow consciousness to release identification with these expressions and return to its essential nature as pure awareness. This balanced appreciation prevents the common mistake of valuing activity over rest or seeking constant stimulation as a way of avoiding the supposed emptiness of quiet moments. When consciousness recognizes its own essential nature as inherently full and complete, periods of rest and receptivity become as valuable and meaningful as periods of active engagement. The value of receptivity extends beyond sleep into the quality of attention that consciousness brings to all experience. When awareness approaches each moment with receptive openness rather than grasping agenda, it can receive whatever life offers without the filtering and distortion that occurs when experience is interpreted primarily through personal desires and expectations. This receptive quality of attention allows consciousness to perceive the inherent beauty and wisdom that permeates all experience, even situations that might initially appear mundane or problematic. When awareness is not preoccupied with trying to make experience conform to personal preferences, it can appreciate the intelligence and appropriateness that characterizes life's unfolding, even in apparently difficult circumstances. The appreciation that emerges from receptive attention naturally generates gratitude for the entire spectrum of human experience, including aspects that the personal mind might prefer to avoid or change. This gratitude is not forced positive thinking or denial of genuine difficulties, but rather recognition of the profound gift of consciousness itself and its capacity to experience the full richness of existence. This recognition of consciousness as a gift transforms the entire approach to life from demanding that experience provide personal satisfaction to receiving whatever arises as an opportunity for deeper understanding and more complete expression of wisdom. This shift from demanding to receiving creates the foundation for genuine contentment that does not depend on particular circumstances or achievements. The contentment that emerges from this receptive approach to experience provides the perfect preparation for restful sleep, because consciousness no longer carries the burden of unfinished business or unresolved conflicts into the night. When the day has been approached as a gift to be received rather than a challenge to be conquered, the transition into rest feels natural and complete rather than forced or premature. This natural completion of daily experience allows consciousness to release its investment in particular outcomes and rest in the satisfaction that comes from having responded to life's offerings with as much wisdom and compassion as current understanding allows. Even if the day included mistakes, difficulties, or unfulfilled hopes, consciousness can rest in the recognition that it engaged as fully as possible from its current level of development. This self-compassion for the limitations of current understanding creates space for continued growth, without the harsh self-judgment that often prevents learning from mistakes. When consciousness approaches its own development with patience and kindness, rather than demanding perfection, the process of transformation can unfold naturally without the resistance that arises from self-criticism. The kindness that consciousness extends toward its own process of development naturally extends toward others who are engaged in their own journey of growth and understanding. When awareness recognizes that everyone is doing their best from their current level of consciousness, interactions with others become opportunities for mutual support rather than occasions for judgment or comparison. This mutual support creates the kind of human community that nurtures individual development while serving collective well-being. When people approach each other from recognition of shared essential nature rather than emphasis on surface differences, relationships become vehicles for expressing and deepening wisdom rather than sources of conflict and competition. The harmony that characterizes relationships based on this deeper recognition provides additional support for restful sleep, because consciousness does not carry the emotional tensions that arise from unresolved interpersonal conflicts. When interactions during the day express genuine understanding and care, the heart can rest peacefully without the agitation that comes from feeling misunderstood or defensive. This emotional peace combines with mental clarity and physical relaxation to create optimal conditions for the kind of profound rest that allows consciousness to return each morning refreshed and renewed, ready to engage another day of opportunities for expressing wisdom and compassion through the countless small and large interactions that constitute human life. As consciousness settles into this foundation of trust and peace, preparing for the natural transition into sleep, it carries with it the profound satisfaction that comes from recognizing its own essential nature and the unlimited potential for continued awakening that remains available in every moment of existence. This satisfaction provides the perfect lullaby, a recognition so complete and restful that it naturally guides awareness into the deepest possible peace. In this profound recognition of our own essential nature, we discover something remarkable about the relationship between philosophical understanding and the natural cycles of rest that govern all existence. Just as the seasons follow their eternal rhythm of growth and dormancy, consciousness itself moves through its own cycles of expansion and contraction, activity and receptivity, engagement and release. Schopenhauer understood that these cycles are not arbitrary patterns imposed upon experience from outside, but rather expressions of the deepest intelligence that governs all manifestation. The same wisdom that guides the migration of birds, the blooming of flowers in spring, and the gentle settling of snow in winter also orchestrates the movement of consciousness between its various states of awareness and rest. This recognition transforms our understanding of sleep from a mere biological necessity into a profound expression of cosmic intelligence. When consciousness approaches rest from this perspective, it participates knowingly in the same fundamental rhythm that sustains the entire universe. The transition into sleep becomes a conscious collaboration with the forces that maintain all existence in perfect balance and harmony. The collaboration begins with recognizing that consciousness need not force or manipulate the process of falling asleep, any more than a flower needs to force itself to close its petals at evening. The movement toward rest occurs naturally when consciousness simply allows its own inherent wisdom to guide the transition without interference from anxious thoughts or desperate efforts to control the timing and quality of sleep. This allowing requires a particular kind of trust that develops gradually through philosophical understanding. When consciousness recognizes through direct investigation that its essential nature transcends all the particular experiences that arise and dissolve throughout the day, it gains confidence that this same essential nature will remain present and intact regardless of what occurs during the night hours. The trust that emerges from this recognition is not blind faith in unknown forces, but rather confidence based on direct knowledge of consciousness' own indestructible nature, just as we trust that the sun will continue to shine even when clouds temporarily obscure its light. Consciousness learns to trust in its own fundamental luminosity, even when the ordinary activities of thinking and perceiving fade into the background of sleep. This trust allows consciousness to release its grip on the familiar landmarks of waking experience without fear of becoming lost or annihilated. The thoughts that seemed so important during the day can be allowed to dissolve naturally. The emotions that created such intensity can be permitted to settle back into the peaceful depths from which they arose. The bodily sensations that demanded attention can be left to find their own natural patterns of rest and restoration. The releasing that characterizes this approach to sleep is not a pushing away or rejecting of experience, but rather a gentle letting go that resembles the way a tree releases its leaves in autumn. There is no violence in this process, no struggle against natural tendencies, but simply a recognition that certain forms of holding and grasping are no longer necessary or appropriate. This natural releasing creates space for consciousness to discover layers of peace that are normally hidden beneath the constant activity of daily mental and emotional processes. As the surface patterns of thinking and feeling settle into quietude, deeper and more subtle dimensions of awareness begin to reveal themselves, each layer more restful and expansive than the last. The deepest of these layers touches something that Schopenhauer recognized as the ultimate ground of all experience, a dimension of consciousness so fundamental and unchanging that it provides the stable foundation upon which all the changing phenomena of waking and sleeping experience arise and dissolve. This ground consciousness is not something we achieve through effort, but rather something we discover we have always been beneath all our various identifications and activities. Recognizing this ground consciousness creates a profound shift in how we understand personal identity and the meaning of individual existence. Instead of experiencing ourselves as isolated fragments of awareness struggling to survive in an alien universe, we begin to recognize our deepest nature as expressions of the same universal consciousness that manifests through all forms of life and intelligence. This recognition naturally generates what Schopenhauer called the compassionate response, a spontaneous caring for all beings that emerges not from moral obligation, but from direct knowledge that the suffering of others is literally our own suffering appearing through different forms. When consciousness knows itself as fundamentally one with all existence, the welfare of others becomes as immediate and important as personal well-being. The compassion that flows from this recognition has a quality of naturalness and sustainability that distinguishes it from emotional sympathy or dutiful charity. Because it emerges from truth rather than sentiment, it does not depend on feeling good about helping others or receiving gratitude for generous actions. Instead, it expresses itself as spontaneously as breathing, requiring no special effort or motivation to maintain. This effortless quality of genuine compassion reflects the way that all authentic expressions of wisdom flow naturally from consciousness that has recognized its own essential nature. Whether manifesting as kindness toward others, creative inspiration in artistic endeavors, or practical intelligence in solving problems, wisdom emerges without strain or struggle when consciousness is no longer caught in the conflicts and contradictions that characterize identification with personal willing. The absence of internal conflict that characterizes this liberated consciousness creates optimal conditions for both effective action during waking hours and profound rest during sleep. When awareness is no longer divided against itself through competing desires and contradictory goals, all available energy can be directed toward appropriate responses to present circumstances, rather than being dissipated through internal struggle. This unified quality of consciousness expresses itself during the day through actions that seem to emerge from a deeper source of intelligence than ordinary rational planning or emotional impulse. Decisions are made with a clarity and appropriateness that often surprise even the person through whom they flow, as if some wiser intelligence were guiding choices from behind the scenes. The same unified intelligence that guides appropriate action during waking hours naturally orchestrates the process of rest and restoration during sleep. Consciousness discovers that it can trust this intelligence to provide exactly the kind and quality of rest needed for optimal renewal, without requiring conscious management or anxious monitoring of sleep patterns. This trust in natural intelligence extends beyond personal restoration to encompass confidence in the larger processes through which life unfolds and develops. When consciousness recognizes its essential unity with the intelligence that governs all existence, it can participate in personal and collective evolution without the anxiety that comes from feeling responsible for controlling outcomes that are beyond individual management. The relief that comes from releasing impossible responsibilities allows consciousness to focus its attention and energy on what is actually within its sphere of influence, while trusting larger forces to handle the vast complexity of existence that no individual mind could possibly comprehend or direct. This appropriate distribution of responsibility creates space for both effective engagement and complete rest. The balance between engagement and rest that emerges from this understanding reflects the natural rhythm through which consciousness expresses its creative potential while maintaining connection to its peaceful source. Neither constant activity nor permanent withdrawal serves the fullest development of human possibility, but rather the graceful movement between expression and return that characterizes all healthy growth. This rhythmic understanding reveals why attempts to achieve permanent states of either excitement or tranquility ultimately prove unsatisfying and unsustainable. Consciousness thrives through the dynamic interplay between its various capacities rather than through fixation on any particular state or condition, however pleasant or elevated it might initially appear. The appreciation for this dynamic quality of healthy consciousness prevents the common mistake of seeking enlightenment as an escape from the natural fluctuations of human experience. Instead of trying to transcend the ordinary cycles of activity and rest, engagement and withdrawal, consciousness learns to participate in these cycles from deeper understanding of their meaning and purpose. This participation transforms every aspect of daily life into opportunities for expressing and deepening wisdom. Morning awakening becomes a conscious emergence from the source of all experience. Daily activities become occasions for practicing present moment awareness and compassionate response. Evening rest becomes a willing return to the peaceful depths that provide renewal for another cycle of conscious engagement. The wholeness that emerges through this integrated approach to living reveals the ultimate goal of philosophical understanding, not as escape from human existence, but as complete embrace of existence from the perspective of its deepest truth. When consciousness recognizes its essential nature clearly enough, it discovers that every dimension of experience, including the most ordinary and seemingly mundane aspects, participates in the same fundamental mystery that mystics and philosophers have sought through elaborate practices and profound contemplations. This democratization of the sacred, this recognition that ultimate truth expresses itself as readily through simple daily activities as through exotic spiritual experiences, creates the foundation for a form of wisdom that remains accessible and relevant regardless of external circumstances or life conditions. The person caring for elderly parents, the student struggling with difficult studies, the worker performing repetitive tasks, all participate equally in the same fundamental awakening that constitutes humanity's highest possibility. The equality of this opportunity reflects the universal nature of consciousness itself, which knows no discrimination between different forms of expression or levels of apparent sophistication. The awareness that experiences profound philosophical insights is the same awareness that experiences the satisfaction of completing simple tasks, or the pleasure of quiet conversation with friends. This recognition of consciousness as the common factor in all experience creates profound appreciation for the ordinary miracle of being aware, regardless of what particular content awareness might contain at any given moment. Whether consciousness is engaged with complex intellectual problems or simply noticing the sensation of breath moving in and out of the body, the fundamental fact of being conscious remains equally remarkable and mysterious. The mystery that permeates all conscious experience, from the most elevated philosophical recognition to the simplest sensory perception, provides endless fascination for consciousness that has learned to appreciate its own nature. This fascination does not diminish with familiarity, but rather deepens as understanding matures, creating a quality of wonder that enriches every moment of existence. This wonder naturally extends to the process of falling asleep itself, transforming what might otherwise be an unconscious transition into a conscious participation in one of existence's most profound mysteries. How does consciousness move from the vivid clarity of waking awareness through the symbolic landscape of dreams into the apparent absence of deep sleep, only to emerge again refreshed and renewed with the coming of morning light? The contemplation of this mystery as consciousness settles toward sleep creates a quality of attention that enhances the depth and restorative power of rest without creating the kind of mental activity that might prevent natural relaxation. This contemplative attention resembles the way one might watch clouds forming and dissolving in the evening sky, with interest but without attachment to particular outcomes or expectations. This watching quality of attention allows consciousness to observe its own transformation as the familiar structures of waking awareness gradually dissolve and reconfigure themselves according to the different laws that govern dream consciousness and deep sleep. The observation occurs without interference, like a scientist studying natural phenomena with respectful curiosity, rather than manipulative agenda. The respectful quality of this self-observation reflects consciousness' growing recognition of its own inherent wisdom and intelligence. Instead of approaching sleep as a problem to be solved or a process to be optimized, consciousness begins to appreciate rest as an expression of the same intelligence that governs all natural processes, from the healing of wounds to the growth of forests to the movement of planets in their orbits. This appreciation creates a quality of reverence that transforms the bedroom into a sacred space where consciousness participates knowingly in the cosmic rhythms that sustain all existence. The simple act of lying down and closing one's eyes becomes a form of worship, an acknowledgement of the profound mystery that allows awareness to dissolve and reconstitute itself in endless cycles of rest and renewal. The reverence that surrounds this understanding of sleep naturally generates gratitude for the entire spectrum of conscious experience, including aspects that the ordinary mind might consider problematic or undesirable. Even difficult dreams, restless nights, or periods of insomnia can be appreciated as expressions of consciousness, exploring different dimensions of its own nature and working through various forms of understanding and integration. This appreciation does not eliminate preferences for peaceful rest or dismiss the practical importance of adequate sleep for physical and mental health. Rather, it provides a foundation of acceptance that prevents the anxiety and resistance that often make sleep difficulties worse, while creating optimal conditions for natural healing and restoration to occur. The healing that occurs during sleep approached with this understanding extends beyond mere physical repair to encompass psychological and spiritual renewal that touches every dimension of human experience. Old emotional wounds may finally release their grip on consciousness. Limiting beliefs about personal identity and possibility may dissolve and be replaced by more expansive self-understanding. Creative solutions to long-standing problems may emerge from depths of wisdom normally inaccessible to ordinary thinking. The creativity that flows from consciousness resting in recognition of its own essential nature often manifests through dreams of remarkable beauty and insight that seem to emerge from a source far wiser than personal knowledge or experience. These dreams may contain profound teachings, artistic inspiration, or simply a quality of peace and clarity that continues to influence waking experience long after the specific dream content has been forgotten. But even more significant than particular dream experiences is the way that consciousness itself becomes transformed through regular periods of rest, approached with philosophical understanding. Just as physical exercise gradually strengthens the body's capacity for activity and endurance, conscious participation in the cycles of rest and renewal gradually strengthens consciousness's capacity for wisdom and compassion during waking hours. This strengthening occurs not through accumulating new abilities or information, but through the progressive removal of obstacles that prevent consciousness from expressing its inherent nature fully and freely. Each night's rest provides opportunity for releasing another layer of unnecessary tension, dissolving another pattern of limiting identification, and opening more completely to the unlimited potential that represents consciousness's birthright. The progressive nature of this transformation ensures that the journey toward complete recognition of consciousness's essential nature remains fresh and engaging throughout an entire lifetime. There is no point at which the process becomes repetitive or boring because each stage of development reveals new depths and possibilities that were previously invisible or inaccessible. This endless quality of conscious development provides profound hope and encouragement for anyone who feels overwhelmed by the apparent complexity of existence or discouraged by the slow pace of personal growth. The path toward genuine wisdom may require patience and persistence, but it offers discoveries and satisfactions that become richer and more meaningful with each step forward. The richness that characterizes mature philosophical understanding naturally expresses itself in the quality of presence that consciousness brings to every aspect of experience, including the transition into sleep. This presence does not require effort or concentration, but rather emerges spontaneously from consciousness that has learned to appreciate its own nature as the source and foundation of all possible experience. In this deepest appreciation of consciousness resting in its own essential nature, we find that the approach to sleep becomes transformed from mere biological necessity into a profound expression of wisdom and trust. The gentle settling into rest carries with it the recognition that consciousness itself is the unchanging awareness within which all the changes of sleeping and waking arise and dissolve like waves upon the ocean of infinite being. This recognition provides the perfect foundation for the kind of deep, restorative rest that allows both body and mind to return to their natural state of ease and well-being, preparing consciousness for another day of opportunities to express its understanding through countless acts of wisdom and compassion, while moving ever more deeply into the mystery of its own essential nature. As we rest in this profound understanding, consciousness discovers something remarkable about the relationship between philosophical wisdom and the natural process of falling asleep. There exists a gentle correspondence between the deepening of insight and the settling of awareness into its most peaceful state. Just as Schopenhauer's investigations revealed layer after layer of truth about the nature of existence, the movement toward sleep unveils deeper and deeper levels of tranquility within consciousness itself. The wisdom that emerges from understanding the will and its manifestations creates a unique preparation for rest that differs markedly from ordinary approaches to sleep. When consciousness recognizes that its struggles and dissatisfactions stem from identification with endless wanting rather than from external circumstances, a profound relaxation naturally occurs. The restless energy that typically keeps the mind churning through problems and desires begins to settle as awareness recognizes that its deepest fulfillment does not depend on resolving every concern or achieving every goal. This recognition allows consciousness to approach sleep with what we might call philosophical trust, a confidence grounded not in blind faith, but in direct understanding of consciousness' own indestructible nature. When awareness has glimpsed its essential identity as that which witnesses all experience without being damaged or diminished by any particular content, it can release its protective vigilance and allow the natural process of rest to unfold without interference. The releasing that occurs through this philosophical preparation differs from the exhausted collapse that often characterizes ordinary sleep. Instead of falling asleep because thinking and feeling have become too burdensome to continue, consciousness settles into rest from a position of clarity and peace. The day's experiences can be allowed to dissolve, not because they were overwhelming, but because awareness recognizes that its essential well-being was never dependent on holding on to or controlling these experiences. This shift in perspective transforms the entire quality of the transition toward sleep. Rather than experiencing rest as an escape from the complexities of existence, consciousness begins to understand sleep as a natural expression of the same wisdom that guides all its activities. Just as the wise person knows when to speak and when to remain silent, when to act and when to wait, consciousness learns to recognize when engagement is appropriate and when rest serves the highest purpose. The appropriateness of rest reveals itself through subtle but unmistakable signs that philosophical understanding helps consciousness recognize and trust. The natural rhythm of energy and attention throughout the day begins to align with deeper cycles of receptivity and expression. Instead of fighting against fatigue or forcing alertness when natural drowsiness arises, consciousness learns to collaborate with its own inherent wisdom about when different states serve its highest development. This collaboration requires developing what Schopenhauer would recognize as a form of practical wisdom that extends his theoretical insights into the lived reality of daily experience. Understanding that suffering comes from attachment to desires is one thing. Knowing how to apply this understanding when lying in bed with a mind full of concerns and planning is another. The philosophical insights must be translated into a lived practice that supports actual transformation rather than remaining merely intellectual concepts. The translation begins with recognizing how the will to live manifests itself even in the simple desire to fall asleep quickly or to have a perfect night's rest. The wanting mind can transform sleep into another project to be accomplished successfully, another desire to be satisfied, creating the very kind of striving that prevents natural rest from occurring. Philosophical wisdom reveals this subtle trap and points toward a different approach based on acceptance rather than achievement. When consciousness approaches sleep with acceptance rather than expectation, a remarkable transformation occurs in the quality of rest that becomes available. The demanding energy that typically accompanies goal-oriented activity dissolves into a receptive openness that allows sleep to emerge naturally from the depths of being rather than being forced from the surface of willing. This receptive approach aligns perfectly with Schopenhauer's understanding of how genuine peace arises through the cessation of willing rather than through the fulfillment of desires. The cessation of willing that characterizes this approach to sleep does not require dramatic renunciation or forceful suppression of natural impulses. Instead, it emerges through gentle recognition that the deepest satisfaction comes from resting in consciousness's own essential nature rather than from achieving particular states or experiences. When awareness understands this truth clearly enough, the compulsive quality of wanting naturally dissolves, creating space for the profound peace that is consciousness's birthright. This peace has quality of fullness rather than emptiness, presence rather than absence. It is not the peace of unconsciousness or the temporary relief that comes from avoiding difficult experiences, but rather the dynamic stillness that emerges when consciousness recognizes its own completeness. This recognition allows awareness to remain fully present and alert while simultaneously releasing all effort and striving, creating optimal conditions for the deepest possible rest. The depth of rest that becomes available through this philosophical preparation often surprises those who discover it for the first time. Sleep approached with understanding tends to be remarkably refreshing and restorative, leaving consciousness renewed not just physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. The integration that occurs during such rest often resolves psychological tensions and clarifies mental confusion in ways that seem almost miraculous compared to ordinary sleep patterns. This enhanced quality of rest reflects the way that philosophical understanding creates harmony between different levels of human experience. When consciousness approaches sleep from recognition of its essential unity, rather than from the fragmented perspective of competing desires and concerns, all dimensions of being can participate in the process of restoration. The body releases physical tensions more completely, the emotions settle into natural balance, and the mind finds the kind of profound quiet that allows deeper wisdom to emerge. The wisdom that emerges from such rest often manifests as insights that seem to arrive fully formed rather than being constructed through laborious thinking. Upon awakening, consciousness may discover that problems which seemed intractable the night before now have obvious solutions, or that questions which created confusion have somehow resolved themselves into clarity. This spontaneous emergence of understanding reflects the natural intelligence that operates when consciousness is no longer interfering with its own deeper processes. The non-interference that allows this natural intelligence to operate requires cultivating what we might call philosophical patience, the willingness to trust that consciousness knows how to restore and renew itself without constant management or anxious oversight. This patience develops gradually as understanding deepens and direct experience confirms that consciousness is inherently wise and self-healing when given appropriate conditions. Creating appropriate conditions for this self-healing involves both what consciousness does and what it refrains from doing as it prepares for rest. The active aspect includes bringing a quality of grateful attention to the day's experiences, acknowledging both the challenges and gifts that life has offered, and recognizing how each experience has contributed to the ongoing process of understanding and growth. This grateful acknowledgement allows consciousness to complete its relationship with the day's events, rather than carrying unfinished emotional business into the night. The receptive aspect involves releasing the need to process, understand, or resolve everything that occurred during the day. Philosophical wisdom recognizes that consciousness operates according to rhythms that include both periods of active engagement and periods of receptive integration. Just as the earth requires both seasons of growth and seasons of dormancy, consciousness needs both times of focused attention and times of open receptivity that allow deeper processes of understanding to unfold naturally. The balance between active engagement and receptive allowing reflects one of Schopenhauer's most profound insights about the nature of human flourishing. Genuine well-being emerges not from constant striving or permanent passivity, but from the graceful movement between appropriate action and wise acceptance. This dynamic balance expresses itself naturally in the rhythm of daily life when consciousness understands its own deeper nature clearly enough. Understanding this rhythm transforms the evening hours from a time of anxious transition or forced relaxation into a natural completion of the day's cycle of conscious engagement. The activities of preparing for bed become opportunities for practicing the kind of mindful attention that supports both practical effectiveness and spiritual development. Simple actions like changing clothes, brushing teeth, or arranging the bedroom environment can be performed with the same quality of presence that characterizes the highest forms of contemplative practice. This integration of contemplative awareness with ordinary activities reflects Schopenhauer's recognition that genuine wisdom must be lived rather than merely understood intellectually. The insights that emerge from philosophical investigation prove their authenticity through their capacity to transform the texture of daily experience, making even the most routine activities occasions for expressing and deepening understanding. The deepening that occurs through this integration of wisdom with daily life creates momentum toward ever greater clarity and peace. Each night's rest approached with philosophical understanding prepares consciousness for deeper insights the following day. Each day's insights prepare consciousness for more profound rest the following night. This self-reinforcing cycle of development continues throughout the lifetime of anyone who approaches existence with genuine philosophical seriousness. The seriousness that authentic philosophical inquiry requires is not the grim determination that characterizes willful striving, but rather the wholehearted commitment that emerges when consciousness recognizes the extraordinary value of understanding its own nature. This commitment provides the motivation necessary for sustained investigation while maintaining the lightness and joy that naturally accompany genuine discovery. The joy that characterizes mature philosophical understanding naturally expresses itself in the quality of peace that consciousness brings to the transition toward sleep. This is not the heavy contentment that comes from satisfying desires, but the luminous tranquility that emerges when consciousness recognizes its own essential nature as the source of all satisfaction. This recognition allows awareness to rest in its own completeness, without depending on particular experiences or achievements for its fundamental well-being. The independence from external conditions that this recognition creates does not lead to withdrawal from life or indifference to circumstances, but rather to a form of engagement that is both more effective and more compassionate than action motivated by personal need or fear. When consciousness operates from recognition of its own essential fullness, it can respond to situations from wisdom and love rather than from compulsion and anxiety. This transformation of motivation naturally affects the quality of relationships that consciousness develops with other people, with the natural world, and with the various circumstances that arise throughout life. Instead of approaching others as potential sources of satisfaction or threats to security, consciousness begins to recognize them as fellow expressions of the same fundamental reality that constitutes its own deepest being. This recognition generates spontaneous care and respect that enhances all interactions, while eliminating the defensive strategies that create so much interpersonal conflict and misunderstanding. The elimination of unnecessary conflict creates additional support for peaceful rest because consciousness no longer carries the emotional tensions that arise from unresolved interpersonal difficulties. When interactions throughout the day express genuine understanding and goodwill, the heart can settle into rest without the agitation that comes from feeling misunderstood or threatened by others. The heart's capacity for rest reveals itself to be intimately connected with its capacity for love, both for specific individuals and for existence itself. When consciousness recognizes its fundamental unity with all that exists, love emerges not as an emotion that comes and goes unpredictably, but as the natural expression of this recognition. This love provides a foundation of warmth and acceptance that supports profound relaxation because consciousness no longer experiences itself as isolated or alienated from its environment. The warmth that emerges from this recognition of unity has a quality that differs markedly from ordinary emotional states. It does not depend on favorable circumstances or reciprocal affection from others, but rather expresses the natural contentment that arises when consciousness knows itself to be at home in existence itself. This contentment provides perhaps the most conducive possible atmosphere for deep and restorative sleep. The restoration that occurs within this atmosphere of philosophical contentment touches every dimension of human experience, preparing consciousness for continued growth and service while allowing it to rest completely in the recognition of its own essential nature. As awareness settles into this deepest understanding of what it means to be conscious, it discovers that sleep itself becomes a form of meditation, a willing return to the source from which all experience emerges and to which it naturally returns. In this profound recognition of consciousness resting in its own essential nature, we find that the journey through Schopenhauer's complete philosophical system has prepared us for something far more valuable than intellectual understanding. It has opened doorways to a direct recognition of what we truly are beneath all our various identifications and activities, revealing the peace and freedom that constitute our deepest nature and remain available in every moment of existence. This availability of peace and freedom provides the perfect foundation for the kind of rest that truly restores and renews, allowing consciousness to release completely into the mystery of its own essential being, while trusting in the natural intelligence that guides all processes of healing and transformation throughout the infinite expressions of existence itself. As consciousness settles deeper into this recognition of its own fundamental nature, something extraordinary begins to unfold in the very fabric of our experience of rest and renewal. The understanding that Schopenhauer cultivated through decades of philosophical investigation reveals itself not as mere intellectual knowledge, but as a living transformation of how awareness relates to every aspect of existence, including the mysterious transition into sleep that marks the end of each day's conscious journey. The mystery of sleep takes on entirely new dimensions when approached through the lens of philosophical wisdom. Rather than viewing rest as simply a biological necessity or an escape from the day's concerns, consciousness begins to recognize sleep as a profound return to its own essential source. This recognition transforms what might otherwise be an unconscious collapse into awareness, into a conscious participation in one of existence's most fundamental rhythms. This participation requires developing a quality of attention that remains present and aware without grasping or controlling. As consciousness prepares for rest, it learns to maintain a gentle awareness that can witness its own transformation without interfering with the natural process of settling into deeper states of peace. This witnessing quality resembles the way one might observe the gradual fading of daylight into evening, with appreciation but without any attempt to hasten or delay the natural progression. The natural progression toward sleep reveals itself to follow patterns that mirror the deeper structures of consciousness itself. Just as Schopenhauer discovered that awareness organizes its experience through fundamental principles that operate beneath the surface of ordinary thinking, the movement toward rest unfolds according to subtle rhythms and cycles that serve consciousness's deepest need for renewal and integration. Understanding these rhythms allows consciousness to collaborate more effectively with its own natural intelligence rather than working against it through anxious effort or forced relaxation. The collaboration begins with recognizing that consciousness knows how to restore and renew itself when given appropriate conditions and freedom from interference. This recognition requires developing trust in processes that operate beyond the reach of deliberate control or conscious management. The trust that emerges from philosophical understanding differs significantly from blind faith or hopeful optimism. It represents confidence based on direct recognition of consciousness's own inherent wisdom and self-healing capacity. When awareness has glimpsed its essential nature as that which remains constant throughout all the changes of waking and sleeping experience, it can approach rest with the kind of deep security that comes from knowing oneself to be fundamentally indestructible. This security allows consciousness to release its protective vigilance and surrender completely to the process of restoration without fear of losing anything essential. The thoughts that seem so important during the day can be allowed to dissolve naturally. The emotions that created such intensity can be permitted to settle back into the peaceful depths from which they arose. The physical sensations that demanded attention can be left to find their own patterns of rest and healing. The surrender that characterizes this approach to sleep is not passive resignation, but active trust in the intelligence that governs all natural processes. This intelligence operates through consciousness itself, not as something foreign or external, but as the deepest expression of awareness's own essential nature. When consciousness recognizes this truth clearly enough, surrendering to rest becomes as natural as breathing, requiring no special effort or technique to accomplish. The effortlessness that emerges through this recognition reflects one of Schopenhauer's most important insights about the relationship between wisdom and natural functioning. When consciousness operates from understanding of its own essential nature rather than from identification with particular desires or concerns, its responses to life situations flow with remarkable spontaneity and appropriateness. This same principle applies to the transition into sleep, which unfolds most gracefully when approached without forcing or straining. The grace that characterizes this natural unfolding creates optimal conditions for the kind of deep restoration that touches every dimension of human experience. Physical tensions that may have accumulated throughout the day begin to release as the body recognizes that it is safe to let go of protective holding patterns. Emotional residues from challenging interactions start to dissolve as the heart opens to its own natural state of peace and acceptance. Most significantly, mental patterns that create suffering through endless wanting and comparing gradually quiet themselves as consciousness recognizes that its deepest satisfaction does not depend on achieving particular outcomes or avoiding unwanted experiences. This quieting of the wanting mind creates space for the profound stillness that Schopenhauer identified as consciousness's natural state, when it is no longer caught in the cycles of desire and frustration. The stillness that emerges through this process has a quality of aliveness and presence rather than mere absence or emptiness. It represents not the stopping of consciousness, but rather consciousness discovering its own essential nature as pure awareness that exists prior to and independent of all particular contents. This discovery transforms sleep from unconscious oblivion into conscious rest in one's own deepest being. The consciousness that approaches sleep from this understanding often experiences remarkable clarity and peace during the transition toward rest. Instead of the confused jumble of thoughts and concerns that typically accompanies ordinary attempts to fall asleep, awareness settles into a state of lucid tranquility that seems to illuminate itself from within. This inner luminosity provides its own form of guidance, naturally drawing consciousness toward the depths where genuine restoration occurs. The guidance that emerges from this inner luminosity operates through subtle attraction rather than effortful direction. Consciousness finds itself naturally drawn toward deeper and more peaceful states without needing to navigate this movement through deliberate choice or conscious control. The process resembles the way iron filings are drawn toward a magnet, moving not through their own effort, but through responsiveness to a force that operates beyond the level of individual decision-making. This magnetic quality of deep rest reflects what Schopenhauer understood about the fundamental structure of reality itself. Just as individual manifestations of will are drawn back toward their source in the universal will, individual consciousness is naturally attracted toward reunion with the universal awareness from which it temporarily emerged into apparent separateness. Sleep provides the daily opportunity for this reunion to occur, allowing consciousness to remember its essential unity with all existence. The remembering that occurs during deep rest often continues to influence experience long after awakening, creating a quality of peace and understanding that persists throughout the following day's activities. This persistence demonstrates that the insights gained through philosophical investigation are not merely intellectual concepts, but living truths that transform consciousness at its very foundation. When understanding reaches sufficient depth, it begins to operate continuously rather than only during periods of deliberate reflection. The continuity of wisdom that emerges through this integration creates momentum toward ever deeper recognition of consciousness's essential nature. Each night's rest approached with philosophical understanding prepares awareness for greater clarity and compassion during waking hours. Each day's insights prepare consciousness for more profound rest during the following night. This self-reinforcing cycle continues throughout the lifetime of anyone who approaches existence with genuine philosophical seriousness. The seriousness that authentic inquiry requires is balanced by the natural joy that accompanies genuine discovery. When consciousness begins to recognize its own essential nature, this recognition brings with it a quality of delight and wonder that enriches every aspect of experience. Even the approach to sleep becomes infused with this wonder as awareness appreciates the remarkable fact of its own existence and the mysterious processes through which it renews and transforms itself. The wonder that consciousness experiences in recognizing its own nature naturally extends to appreciation of the entire cosmos within which this recognition occurs. The same intelligence that enables awareness to understand itself also governs the movement of planets, the growth of forests, and the intricate processes through which life sustains and regenerates itself throughout the natural world. Recognizing this universal intelligence creates a sense of belonging and participation that eliminates the loneliness and alienation that often trouble human existence. The belonging that emerges from this recognition provides additional support for peaceful rest because consciousness no longer experiences itself as an isolated fragment struggling to survive in an alien environment. Instead, it knows itself to be an integral expression of the same intelligence that sustains all existence, supported by the same forces that maintain the entire cosmos in perfect balance and harmony. This knowledge creates profound security that allows complete relaxation without fear or anxiety about personal survival. The security that comes from recognizing one's essential unity with universal intelligence does not create complacency or indifference to practical responsibilities, but rather enables more effective and compassionate engagement with life's challenges and opportunities. When consciousness operates from this foundation of security, it can respond to situations from wisdom and love rather than from defensive reactivity or compulsive striving. The transformation of motivation that occurs through this recognition naturally affects the quality of relationships that consciousness develops with everything it encounters. Other people are no longer experienced primarily as sources of satisfaction or threats to security, but rather as fellow expressions of the same fundamental reality that constitutes one's own deepest being. This shift in perspective generates spontaneous care and respect that enhances all interactions while eliminating much of the conflict and misunderstanding that typically characterizes human relationships. The harmony that develops in relationships approach from this understanding creates additional support for restful sleep because consciousness no longer carries the emotional tensions that arise from unresolved interpersonal conflicts. When the day's interactions express genuine understanding and goodwill, the heart can settle into rest without the agitation that comes from feeling misunderstood or threatened by others. The heart's capacity for rest reveals itself to be intimately connected with its capacity for love and acceptance, both toward oneself and toward existence as a whole. When consciousness recognizes its fundamental unity with all that exists, love emerges not as an emotion that depends on favorable circumstances, but as the natural expression of this recognition. This love provides a foundation of warmth and acceptance that supports the deepest possible relaxation. The warmth that emerges from recognition of unity has a quality that differs from ordinary emotional states because it does not depend on external conditions or reciprocal responses from others. It represents the natural contentment that arises when consciousness knows itself to be at home in existence itself, no longer seeking something outside itself for completion or fulfillment. This contentment creates perhaps the most conducive atmosphere possible for profound and restorative sleep. The restoration that occurs within this atmosphere of philosophical contentment extends beyond mere physical renewal to encompass psychological and spiritual regeneration that touches every aspect of human experience. Old patterns of thinking and feeling that no longer serve consciousness' highest development may dissolve during sleep, replaced by more mature and wise approaches to life's challenges. Creative insights and solutions to long-standing problems may emerge from depths of understanding that are normally inaccessible to ordinary thinking. The creativity that flows from consciousness resting in recognition of its own essential nature often manifests in ways that seem to transcend personal knowledge or experience. Dreams may contain profound teachings or artistic inspiration that appears to emerge from a source of wisdom far greater than individual understanding. Upon awakening, consciousness may discover that insights have emerged fully formed, as if some deeper intelligence had been working on important questions while the personal mind was at rest. This deeper intelligence represents what Schopenhauer recognized as consciousness's essential nature operating freely when no longer constrained by the limitations of personal identification and conceptual thinking. During deep sleep approached with philosophical understanding, awareness can access dimensions of wisdom and creativity that remain hidden during ordinary waking consciousness. This access demonstrates that sleep is not merely the absence of consciousness, but rather consciousness exploring different modes of its own essential being. The exploration that occurs during sleep reveals new depths and possibilities that continue to unfold throughout the entire journey of human development. There is no point at which this exploration becomes complete or final, but rather an endless deepening of recognition that reveals fresh dimensions of truth and beauty at every stage. This endless quality ensures that the approach to sleep never becomes routine or mechanical, but remains a source of wonder and discovery throughout an entire lifetime. The lifetime journey of deepening understanding creates appreciation for both the active and receptive phases of consciousness's development. Periods of engaged activity during waking hours provide opportunities for expressing wisdom through practical service and compassionate action. Periods of rest and receptivity during sleep allow consciousness to integrate these expressions and open to even deeper recognitions of its own essential nature. The integration that occurs through this balance between activity and rest reflects the natural rhythm through which consciousness actualizes its highest potential while maintaining connection to its peaceful source. Neither constant engagement nor permanent withdrawal serves the fullest development of human possibility, but rather the graceful movement between appropriate expression and wise receptivity that characterizes all healthy growth and development. The health that emerges through this balanced approach to living expresses itself in the quality of vitality and presence that consciousness brings to every aspect of experience. This vitality does not depend on youthful energy or favorable circumstances, but rather emerges from alignment with the fundamental forces that sustain all existence. When consciousness operates in harmony with these forces, even simple activities like preparing for sleep become expressions of the same intelligence that governs the entire cosmos. The intelligence that governs cosmic processes also orchestrates the intricate transformations that occur within individual consciousness during periods of rest and renewal. The same wisdom that guides planetary movements and seasonal changes also directs the subtle processes through which awareness restores and regenerates itself during sleep. Recognizing this connection between personal rest and universal rhythm creates profound appreciation for the ordinary miracle of consciousness refreshing itself through natural cycles. The appreciation that emerges from this recognition naturally generates gratitude for the entire spectrum of conscious experience, including aspects that the ordinary mind might consider problematic or undesirable. Even difficulties encountered during sleep, such as challenging dreams or periods of restlessness, can be appreciated as expressions of consciousness working through various forms of understanding and integration. This appreciation does not eliminate preferences for peaceful rest, but prevents the anxiety and resistance that often make sleep difficulties worse. The prevention of unnecessary anxiety creates optimal conditions for the natural healing and restoration that sleep is designed to provide. When consciousness approaches rest without demanding particular outcomes or fighting against whatever naturally arises, all available energy can be directed toward the processes of renewal rather than being dissipated through internal conflict and resistance. This allows sleep to fulfill its deepest function of returning awareness to its source for complete restoration and preparation for continued growth. The growth that occurs through sleep approached with philosophical understanding often manifests as increased capacity for wisdom and compassion during waking hours. The insights that emerge from deep rest tend to express themselves naturally through more skillful responses to life's challenges and greater sensitivity to the needs of others. This demonstrates that genuine philosophical development is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a transformation of consciousness that affects every aspect of human experience. The transformation that occurs through sustained philosophical investigation creates momentum toward ever greater clarity and freedom. Each recognition of truth supports deeper recognitions, creating a natural progression toward complete understanding of consciousness's essential nature. This progression unfolds most gracefully when supported by the kind of profound rest that allows consciousness to integrate its discoveries and prepare for continued exploration of its own infinite depths. The infinite quality of consciousness's essential nature ensures that this exploration never reaches a final conclusion, but continues to reveal new wonders and possibilities throughout eternity. This endless potential for discovery provides hope and encouragement for anyone who feels overwhelmed by life's apparent complexity or discouraged by the gradual pace of personal development. The journey toward wisdom may require patience and persistence, but it offers rewards that become increasingly rich and meaningful with every step forward. The richness that characterizes mature understanding naturally expresses itself in the quality of peace and presence that consciousness brings to the transition toward sleep. This peace does not represent withdrawal from life or indifference to circumstances, but rather the dynamic stillness that emerges when awareness rests in recognition of its own essential completeness. From this foundation of inner fulfillment, consciousness can engage fully with existence while maintaining the equanimity that supports both effective action and profound rest. The equanimity that emerges from philosophical maturity provides perhaps the most valuable preparation possible for the kind of sleep that truly restores and renews all dimensions of human experience. When consciousness approaches rest from this foundation of understanding, sleep becomes not merely a biological necessity, but a conscious participation in the fundamental rhythms that sustain all existence, allowing awareness to return each morning refreshed and renewed, ready for another day of expressing wisdom and compassion, while continuing its eternal journey into the mystery of its own essential nature. The mystery of its own essential nature. In this profound recognition of consciousness returning to its source, we discover that the deepest philosophical understanding naturally culminates in the most perfect preparation for sleep. The wisdom that Schopenhauer developed through his relentless investigation of human experience reveals itself not as abstract knowledge to be stored in memory, but as a living transformation that touches the very foundation of how awareness relates to existence itself. The relationship between philosophical insight and natural rest operates according to principles that mirror the fundamental structures of reality Schopenhauer uncovered in his investigations. Just as he discovered that beneath all apparent diversity lies a single underlying will expressing itself through countless manifestations, so too does he reveal that beneath all the various activities of consciousness lies a single peaceful awareness that remains constant throughout every change of state and condition. This unchanging awareness provides the stable foundation upon which all the fluctuations of daily experience arise and dissolve like waves upon an infinite ocean. When consciousness recognizes its essential identity with this unchanging foundation, the transition into sleep loses its character of unconscious collapse and reveals itself as a conscious return to one's own deepest nature. This recognition transforms rest from mere biological necessity into spiritual communion with the source of all experience. The communion that occurs during sleep approached with this understanding extends beyond personal restoration to encompass a profound connection with the intelligence that governs all natural processes throughout the cosmos. The same wisdom that orchestrates the movement of celestial bodies, the changing of seasons, and the intricate processes of growth and renewal throughout nature also directs the subtle transformations that occur within individual consciousness during periods of rest. Recognizing this connection between personal restoration and cosmic intelligence creates a quality of reverence that transforms the bedroom into a sacred space where consciousness participates knowingly in the universal rhythms that sustain all existence. The simple acts of preparing for sleep become expressions of the same mindful attention that characterizes the highest forms of contemplative practice, each movement and gesture performed with awareness of its participation in the greater symphony of existence. The symphony of existence reveals itself to consciousness that has developed sufficient sensitivity through philosophical investigation. What might initially appear as random events and disconnected experiences begins to reveal underlying patterns of meaning and purpose that connect individual development with universal evolution. This recognition creates profound appreciation for the role that personal rest and renewal play in the larger processes through which consciousness explores and actualizes its infinite potential. The potential that lies dormant within every moment of conscious experience becomes accessible through the kind of philosophical preparation that Schopenhauer's insights provide. When awareness approaches sleep from understanding of its own essential nature rather than from exhaustion or escape, rest becomes an active exploration of consciousness's deepest possibilities rather than a passive withdrawal from experience. This exploration occurs naturally and effortlessly when consciousness simply allows its own inherent wisdom to guide the process of settling into deeper states of peace. The guidance that emerges from consciousness' own inherent wisdom operates through attraction rather than effort, drawing awareness toward its natural state of rest and restoration like iron filings moving towards a magnet. This magnetic quality reflects what Schopenhauer understood about the fundamental structure of desire and satisfaction. Just as all particular wants point toward a deeper longing for complete fulfillment, all states of consciousness point toward the perfect peace that represents awareness's essential nature. The peace that represents consciousness's essential nature has a quality of fullness rather than emptiness, presence rather than absence. It is not the peace of unconsciousness or temporary relief from difficulties, but rather the dynamic stillness that emerges when awareness recognizes its own completeness and no longer seeks anything outside itself for satisfaction. This recognition allows consciousness to remain fully present and alert, while simultaneously releasing all effort and striving. The combination of presence and release that characterizes this approach to sleep creates optimal conditions for the deepest possible restoration. Physical tensions accumulated throughout the day can dissolve completely as the body recognizes that it is safe to abandon all protective holding patterns. Emotional residues from challenging interactions can settle naturally as the heart opens to its own inherent state of acceptance and forgiveness. Mental patterns that create suffering through endless comparison and judgment can quiet themselves as consciousness recognizes that its deepest well-being depends on nothing external. The quieting of these surface patterns of activity allows deeper currents of wisdom and creativity to emerge from the depths of consciousness. During sleep approached with philosophical understanding, awareness often accesses insights and solutions that remained hidden during ordinary waking activity. These discoveries emerge not through effort or analysis, but through the natural intelligence that operates when consciousness is no longer interfering with its own deeper processes. Through this complete journey into the philosophical universe that Arthur Schopenhauer created, we discover that his greatest gift lies not in any single insight or argument, but in his demonstration that genuine wisdom naturally leads consciousness toward its own most peaceful state. His understanding of the will, his analysis of human suffering, and his vision of liberation through recognition of our essential nature all point toward the same profound truth, that the deepest fulfillment comes not from achieving external goals, but from resting in the awareness that witnesses all experience without being disturbed by any particular content. As you allow these insights to settle into the depths of your being, may you find in sleep not merely rest from the day's activities, but a conscious return to the source of all peace, wisdom, and understanding.